Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard the Pilot Lawyer Podcast. Thank you for your attention while this important legal information is reviewed. What you hear should not replace consultation with an attorney and should not be considered advice for your situation. On behalf of the Pilot Lawyer and your entire crew, it's our pleasure to have you aboard.
Welcome, aviators, to the Pilot Lawyer Podcast with us, the Eisen brothers at the Eisen Law Firm, where aviation law is all we do, nothing else. You're here for what we do best, navigating the FAA medical certification process for pilots and those who want to become pilots. And as we say around the office, if you don't laugh, you cry. And for the next 30 minutes, we hope to bring you the lighter side of what can otherwise be a frustrating process. So whether you're laughing at us or with us, join us, brothers, as we discuss the fascinating world of FAA medical certification. Today, we are going to discuss BasicMed, what that is, what it lets you do, what it won't let you do, how you get it, so on and so forth. Typically, we would alternate the opening of these things. And I think at this point, it would have been Anthony's turn to do the opening because I did it last time. But Anthony has a cold.
The big cheese.
How you doing?
I'm hanging in there. You know, they say if you walk, you can work. Here I am sitting. So I feel like I'm meeting it halfway.
You sound sick and you look sicker.
Well, I will work through it to get you your medical, sir.
Well, that's what we've been doing today, though. So a testament to your fortitude.
We did take a lunch, though.
Well, you got to feed a cold.
I enjoyed it. Discuss the fever. So you're doing that trick for me.
Anywho,
served your purpose.
I've also, listening to our podcast, have realized I say
You're the
anywho.
one person that's been listening, huh?
I'm
and the stats.
Are you the one that gave us a 4 out of 5 stars?
That's me. Anyway,
He's Tree Hugger Joe.
Try not to say anywho so much. So for all of you out there listening that are sick and tired of me saying anywho, all right. Moving
Hold on
on.
a second, everybody. If you want to keep the anywho, text Christopher at 863-712-9475. I got to say, you guys are doing a lousy job of texting in. I'm just putting that out there. Okay, go ahead.
Our mom did text it.
Well, let's get to it here. So enough of the...
Let's get to the content
Yeah, let's
already.
get to the
Give me
content.
content.
Nobody wants to hear us banter. All right, so we're talking about BasicMed and what that is, how that works, and what type of limitations you can have, so on and so forth. So essentially, for those weekend warriors out there in the world of aviation that want to fly something a little bit nicer than light sport aircraft, even though I think some of the light sport aircraft are probably pretty cool in a lot of ways, but for those that want to maybe do a little bit more than what light sport can offer, and don't necessarily want to undergo the scrutiny of medical certification with the FAA due to certain things in their medical history, or maybe they just don't like the idea of government breathing down their neck all the time. The FAA allows airmen to fly under what's called BasicMed. There are certain limitations with BasicMed that we're going to discuss and how those would interplay into certain types of flying that you would do, the aircraft that you would do it in, and your medical history. So kind of diving into it, you have to, in order to qualify for BasicMed, you have to have held a medical certificate, a valid medical certificate, since at least July 14th, 2006.
Now let me ask you this question. It's a very good question. Does that date start when? We've seen this before where the duration of your medical certificate expired during that period of time, but there was a change in essentially the duration of a certificate about that time. So if you were under 40, the duration of the certificate is longer than if it was over 40, but that there was a duration change before that date.
We're getting right into this nuanced nature of this with your sick mind.
Yeah.
And your sick voice.
Why don't you just go ahead and tell us what you want to hear on this
Well,
issue?
I'm just trying to get at the idea that you really need to scrutinize, did I have a medical then or not? And you may actually have had a medical if you're of the subset of individuals that perhaps were before. Go with me. If you were under 40 and you feel like, well, my certificate may have expired during that time, you may have actually had a medical because the requirements change. So just keep that in mind. If you have a question about your age and whether or not you really had a medical at that time, you might want to do some digging.
So there's that. There is a time component. You've had to have at least held a first, second, or third class medical at some point after July 14th, 2006. You also have to currently possess a valid U.S. driver's license in order to comply with general basic med requirements. This guy's got a story for everything.
Jeez.
We recently found more out about that. And when I say we, I mean us. We had a client who discussed this. We researched this issue. You have to have a U.S. driver's license.
I guess does it have to be valid?
Sure. But that's not where I'm going.
Okay.
It's not an international. If you're in a different country and you don't possess a U.S. driver's license, there is no workaround to it being a U.S. driver's license is an absolute that it has to be a U.S. driver's license.
It can't be a Guatemalan driver's license?
It can't be.
Do they have driver's license?
What's that?
Well, yeah. Why wouldn't they? I'm just saying. Are you talking about having an international driver's license? I'm just picking a fictitious country.
Guatemala or Turks and Caicos, France, Russia.
No one's heard of France. So you have to have a U.S. issued
That's right.
license.
That's correct. One of the discussions there was that, well, maybe, now don't do anything illegal, folks, but you might want to ascertain if you are an international person and you want to get basic med, whatever reason, you might want to ascertain which state is going to be the easiest for you to get a driver's license within that state, because it may be nuances from state to state.
Okay.
So no, it has to be a U.S. driver's license, so figure that out.
Rest your weary mind. In addition to those requirements, we also have, or the FAA has a requirement that I don't have any requirements. I have low standards. But you have to get a physical exam with a state licensed physician using a comprehensive medical examination checklist.
Here's something that's interesting. And at one time where Alex can actually be useful on this.
Hey.
Did you know that a chiropractor is a state licensed physician? They can sign you off on basic med.
I have done it.
Discuss. Who have you done it for?
You.
And
sure that's
invite the inquiry from the FAA. So
I examined him. I took a full medical history.
You have to have a physical exam with a state licensed physician using a comprehensive medical examination checklist. You also have to complete a basic med medical education course. And then the FAA says, go fly. So if you can meet those requirements, go fly. That's what the FAA wants to do.
Isn't it crazy?
But there's a lot more to it than just that.
But isn't it crazy, though, that if you were wanting to get a third class and you had some issue, some problematic medical certificate, I was like obstructive sleep apnea, it'll run you up the flagpole, run you so far up that you can see your house. But basic med, you could get sleep apnea. Go fly.
Go fly. Go fly now.
But I mean, don't you have to have certificate first? So don't you have to go through all that first and then switch over?
You might get sleep apnea
after you last held a medical certificate.
Okay.
And that's where a lot of people, I think, need to be aware of the existence of basic med and how it might be able to kind of keep them outside of maybe some of this governmental scrutiny that would come along with medical certification on a first, second, or third class medical, if they're just looking to do what the basic med would afford them to do, which is what I'm about to get into. So if you've had a medical and it naturally expired and it was valid at the time it was issued and it naturally expired, and then subsequently you've developed, after the issuance of that medical, you developed some other type of medical condition that might be potentially disqualifying or might require additional scrutiny from the FAA, and you're concerned about, that whole process, then basic med might be a viable option for you to kind of, I guess, get around that additional scrutiny. Wouldn't you say? I mean, isn't that the idea of it?
And one characteristic that's interesting is 14 CFR 6153, which essentially asks about, should you self-ground in a circumstance where you may have a medical deficiency that would prevent you from being able to hold a medical certificate. So the question is, like, with obstructive sleep apnea, Well, I know that could potentially cause me to have a problem with the first, second, or third class medical. But the way the regulation reads, it says knows or has reason to know of any medical condition that would make the person unable to meet the requirements for the medical certificate necessary for the pilot operation. So in other words, obstructive sleep apnea is not a disqualifying condition for basic med. So 6153 would then essentially not be relevant to any condition other than those which would be, oh man, it has such a good train of thought.
Land the plane there.
They would not be otherwise something that would, what am I trying to say?
Other
than be deniable.
Right.
That's the only thing I can think of.
First, second, or third class?
Yeah. So you only really have to consider those disqualifying conditions for basic med under 6153.
Basic med does have certain medical conditions that require a one-time special issuance.
What can you tell me about those while I sit here and wait?
I'll tell you this much. If you really want to get a comprehensive look at the whole idea of basic med, go to 14 CFR Part 68. That's where basic med is codified under the regulations.
Codified.
Cauterized. That's just not a fish up in Maine. Anyhow,
I hope that whoever listens to this,
I hope they find it witty and droll.
What goes on in their life to where they would listen to this? Go ahead. Well, I guess.
Okay. Under basic med, if you have certain medical conditions, you have to have obtained at least a one-time special issuance before you could transition over to basic med under the regulation. And those conditions deal with kind of a slew of issues, but the first category is mental health disorders. And so if you have certain mental health disorders that are listed under Part 68, you will have to obtain a special issuance at least one time. Then you can transition over to basic med. Those are personality disorder that is severe enough to have repeatedly manifested itself by overt acts, a psychosis defined as a case in which an individual has manifested delusions, hallucinations, grossly bizarre or disorganized behavior, that's you, Alex, or other commonly accepted symptoms of psychosis, or may reasonably be expected to manifest delusions, hallucination, grossly bizarre or disorganized behavior, or other commonly accepted symptoms of psychosis, a bipolar disorder, that's me, or a substance dependence within the previous 2 years as defined in Section 67.307A4 of 14 Code of Federal Regulations. That there, if you listen to other podcasts, we've extensively exhausted substance dependence.
That one.
Yeah, so that's a very nuanced question right there as to, well, do I have substance dependence? Do I meet the regulatory criteria for substance dependence? If you do,
I would think you do.
I'm getting better. if you do, you would have to obtain a special issuance for substance dependence, and then you could transition over to basic med.
Here's probably number one.
But there's more.
Okay,
answer your question, then I'll talk about.
I'll answer my question.
Answer your question.
If I'm going along, fat, dumb, and happy,
I'm fat
and dumb on basic med, I never had any such issues, but all of a sudden, I have a heart attack.
Oh, you want me to skip the neurological disorders and go straight to cardiovascular conditions?
Well, let me
Jerry.
Let me set you up. What's going to have to happen? Can I still get out there flying on basic med?
No, not necessarily. If you have one of these conditions while you're flying on basic med, you're going to have to then obtain a one-time special issuance before you can then effectively fly under basic med.
You're fibbing.
I fib you not.
Has your FAA medical certificate been denied? Are you concerned you may not be able to get a medical certificate from the FAA? Are you at risk for FAA action for failing to report your medical history appropriately? Call the pilot lawyer at 1-855-FAA-1215 to discuss your options for getting the FAA to issue your medical certificate and get you flying. We are happy to evaluate your case and discuss with you a plan for presenting your case to the AME or the FAA. Aviation law is all we do, nothing else.
Under basic med, if you've had a cardiovascular condition, which is defined as myocardial infarction, coronary heart disease that has required treatment.
What was that?
Coronary.
I thought it said coronation.
No. You're hallucinating. He's got a mental disorder.
I'm going to have to rip his basic med.
It expired a long time ago.
Coronary heart disease that has required treatment, cardiac valve replacement, or heart replacement. If you've had one of those 4 conditions, you'll have to obtain a special issuance, hoping you can.
Tin Man wouldn't be able to fly under basic med.
He doesn't even have a heart. Actually,
if he got
technically,
if the wizard gave him that heart,
until he had
that was a transplant technically. I mean, come on now.
Was it a replacement?
Yeah, but the FAA would never.
See, he never had a heart to begin with, so there was no replacement.
That's a nuance.
Oh, boy.
Well, the FAA wouldn't give him special issuance anyhow. So
you're a Tin Man.
what's going on with all this tin?
All this magnetic interference of the instruments. Anywho. Okay, stop with the anywho's.
What's the deal with your co-pilot over there, the scarecrow? Does this guy even have a brain?
Well, at least he's got the courage to land the airplane.
That's the line.
Lame. That whole thing is lame.
Yeah, well, that's clean. That's why we got a clean rating.
Go ahead.
Anyhow, there's another category
I bet
of
Dorothy
medical
would
conditions.
fly right into a tornado.
There's another category of medical conditions though, that you have to be aware of if you're looking to fly on basic med, and those are dealing with neurological disorders. If you've had a history of epilepsy, disturbance of consciousness without satisfactory medical explanation of the cause, or a transient loss of control of nervous system functions without satisfactory medical explanation of the cause, you'll have to obtain that one-time special issuance. So you'll have to apply for first, second, third class medical, appropriately list these issues, let the FAA vet your eligibility based upon case history, and then assuming that you can obtain the special issuance or a valid medical letter of eligibility, then after that, having been brought to the FAA's attention, you can transition over to basic med, which is an interesting question, one I've been dealing with here lately. And that is transient loss of control of nervous system functions without satisfactory medical explanation of the cause. Not me personally, but for a potential client. In those situations, what is a satisfactory medical explanation of the cause?
Well, that's an interesting question. In theory, you could say, well, hey, listen, I have a medical explanation of a cause, but what's unclear.
Is it satisfactory?
Is it satisfactory?
Well, my view on that was, listen, if you have a medical professional who's willing to put it in writing that they've analyzed this transient loss of the nervous control system, right? But they understand what its etiology was, where it came from, and what the likelihood of it coming back is, and all that kind of stuff. And maybe it's not as severe as it was initially thought. Maybe you initially went in thinking that you had a transient ischemic attack, a TIA. But then after further evaluation, it was determined, no, it wasn't that. It was something else born out of a more common issue. And it's been treated and it's resolved. I think at that point, if the medical professional is willing to put that in writing and put it in your medical record, you have medical professionals saying, listen, this is what it is. This is my explanation.
I think you should discuss it with the doctor signing you off on basic med for sure.
Yeah, I would agree.
And if the FAA disagrees with this, call us at 863-712-9475.
That being said, that's
a slightly gray area there.
Yeah, it's somewhat of a gray area. I mean, if you want to be rock solid on it.
That's the thing with basic med. The whole thing is kind of like they didn't want it. It just kind of showed up and, it's like, I'm not telling you to do this, but it seems like they just don't care about basic med folks. It's like,
it's really,
but I feel like it's ripe for the picking.
They ever get done with the veterans?
Yeah, they're going to go out. Seems like,
well, that's the thing.
med.
I mean, I think based on from my perception of what I've heard in the community, there's a lot of misconception about being on basic med. People that maybe applied, they got a denial or they got deferred. There's one. If you apply and you get deferred, and you don't respond to any of the requests for information that the FAA sends you, and then you get a failure to provide denial, technically you have a denial and you wouldn't be eligible for basic med, correct?
That's right. Your most recent medical have been suspended, denied, or revoked.
You can't just then say, well, I'm going to go on basic med now. You have to overcome all that.
Yeah. You're going to have to go back and get that medical issue.
And I think
I'll say an interesting nuance.
Mm-hmm.
Nuance. The nuance here is that what if you surrender your medical? That's an interesting piece there.
Can you surrender your medical?
You can surrender your medical in certain circumstances. If they send you an info request, or if you're under investigation, you can't just say, hey, about that. Forget that. Here's your medical. They won't take that because they know that you can then go to BasicMed. So they'll want to revoke your medical or deny your medical. But if you're going along fat, dumb, and happy, you might be able to surrender the medical. Or here's a good one. Let's say you're on a special issuance for substance dependence and you're doing all the monitoring, you're doing all the testing, and you're doing all the this and the that, and you don't want to anymore. You want to go to BasicMed. How would you transition off of the special issuance onto BasicMed, knowing that you have to continue doing what's required of you under the special issuance, or else you get your special issuance withdrawn? How would you get onto BasicMed without having your special issuance withdrawn?
I think you need to let your special issuance naturally time out.
The special issuance or the certificate? Your certificate's going to have a different date of expiration. It's my understanding, having spoken to the doctors at the FAA, is that the preferred method there, I'm not speaking for the FAA, but my understanding, what I would tell someone to do is, if your medical, let's say your special issuance is good for 5 years or whatever, just on its face, and your medical expires next month, you just wouldn't go in and renew your medical. In doing so, the FAA would think, well, this person doesn't have a medical. You let it expire. We don't care about them. You would transition to BasicMed. Whereas you wouldn't want to just say halfway through, oh, I'm done, and let your special, stop doing what you need to do with your special issuance and so on and so forth. Because in doing so, you'll have your special issuance revoked, and then you'll no longer be eligible for BasicMed.
Oh, my. You could probably do that George Takei thing.
Oh, my.
So now that we've discussed some of the medical concerns that you'll need to square away before you can transition over to BasicMed, what exactly can you do when you go fly?
Who is your daddy, and what does he do? Well, I'll tell you one thing he doesn't do while flying on BasicMed. He doesn't fly internationally with a great deal of restraint, because BasicMed is only good for certain areas of the world, which include the United States, Mexico, Bahamas, and other certain Caribbean countries.
Pretty much anywhere you'd want to fly.
You can't go to Canada?
I'm not going to Canada on it, but I did hear some scuttlebutt that
That's
Canada might be approved soon. But I'm not flying my 172 from Miami to London on it. That's for sure.
Maybe if it's in
Charles
the
Lindbergh.
storage hold of a 787.
That's so good.
Okay. There are aircraft requirements that you have to abide by under BasicMed. You cannot fly any aircraft that's authorized under federal law to carry not more than 6 occupants. So let me rephrase that. Here are the aircraft requirements. You can fly. This is the better way of putting it. You can fly any aircraft authorized under federal law to carry not more than 6 occupants, has a maximum certificated takeoff weight of not more than 6,000 pounds. Although I have heard that in the most recent appropriations budget for the FAA, they were talking about increasing that to 12,000 pounds. But as of right now, the aircraft can have a maximum takeoff weight of 6,000 pounds.
That would be convenient for you if they raise it to 12,000, because then
I can have
bring you along with you.
yeah, you.
Nice turnaround.
Yeah. You walked right into that one.
Open the door and waltzed on through.
I'm glad to see you up walking around, though.
Hanging around.
There are certain operating requirements as well. Under BasicMed, you can't carry more than 5 passengers, which kind of makes sense because you can't be in an aircraft that's for more than 6 occupants. So you gotta
don't be in an aircraft more than 6 minutes with you.
Yeah. You can operate under VFR or IFR within the United States, Mexico, the Bahamas,
And other Caribbean countries.
You have to stay at 18,000 feet, or you have to stay at less than 18,000 feet MSL and not exceed 250 knots, which then brings up the question, well, can I fly complex aircraft? Can I fly aircraft that have constant speed props or retracts or, other things, all that kind of stuff. So yes, you just have to stay under 250 knots. It's not there's no limitation on the horsepower or anything like that. I mean, you could go fly yourself your little L-39, I suppose, as long as you stayed under 250 knots.
What about my Cirrus jet?
Sure, standard 250 knots and under 18,000.
What's the weight
MSL.
limits on those? Do you even know?
Well, that L39 has got to be less than 6,000 pounds. Again, that was a good point, though. Who said that?
What?
The weight limit.
I did.
Okay, well,
I'm the only one that brings good points to the discussion.
the other thing is you're not going to be out there flying around for compensation or higher.
Well, there's a nuance that I'd love to
For
discuss.
CFIs,
Yeah. Thanks for cutting me off.
you're
CFIs.
not supposed to be talking. You know, you're over here.
Well, I
Jibber jabber.
sometimes you have to jump in when you want content. So CFIs, you can do. Now there's a nuance. CFIs can use BasicMed. So now you're not going to find that anywhere in the regulation, but that is a thing. That is a thing.
Well, I think that pretty much sums up the BasicMed. I think the important thing is for a lot of people out there, if you think you might get disqualified, or if you have something that's maybe come up in your medical history that you feel is going to be more scrutinized than it would otherwise and could cause a deferral or maybe a denial, as long as it's not one of these specifically enumerated medical conditions under Part 68, it might behoove you, depending upon the type of flying you're doing, to consider BasicMed and not submitting an application. Because as soon as you submit that application for a third, second, first class medical and you go and see your AME and it gets deferred, you're automatically out of the consideration, out of the running for BasicMed until such time as you get the FAA to establish your eligibility on that application. Then you would become eligible again for BasicMed, again, assuming it's not one of those specifically disqualifying conditions and so on and so forth that we discussed. Well, I think that pretty much wraps up today's discussion. We've already touched down. It was one of those flights that we didn't even tell anyone to put the seat backs up and the trays in the right position. We just landed. So coming up on the next podcast, anybody got any clues, any ideas,
Something related to the FAA and medical certification.
I think we might need to.
That's going to be riveting.
I think we might need to talk about the reconciliation process for veterans that the FAA is presently offering, what that means, how that's working, and maybe you don't want to necessarily sit around and wait for the FAA to come knocking on your door with a reconciliation letter. Maybe you want to do something proactive.
That seems like a generally good idea anyways.
That's one thing we could talk about. But I'm sure there's other things we'll probably talk about. Any parting thoughts before we disembark? Anybody?
Feeling pretty ill now. So
Okay.
let's wrap this one up. It's a wrap.
All right. Well, you've logged another uneventful half hour listening to the Pilot Lawyer Podcast. And I don't have a witty closing today. I'm tired of talking about our wives and how they deny they know us in public. And I don't feel like I got a lot of feedback off of the whole buffet shuddering as we, and both literally and figuratively as we walk past. So I'm just going to say, I hope you have a good rest of your day, wherever you're at. And we'll talk to you next time.
This is thepodcastfactory.com.